Metaphor and symbolism, or self-portraiture without the artist even being in the picture. People, places and objects. I'm the subject. I'm also the verb as I paint. I'm also the object. I'm the complete sentence, said Barnett Newman in 1963. The abstract expressionist painter really theorizes, as many people do, that all art is in fact self-portraiture. No matter the subject, no matter the narrative, we can tell more about the artist through his painting than we can through the subject. Barnett Newman, of course, abstract expressionist of very simple linear forms. Perhaps it's his style. Mark Rothko, another abstract expressionist painter. Very different. Quite warm. In fact, in the Tate Modern, the only room where the lighting is low for the paintings. A very different artist would be Jackson Pollock, the most famous of the abstract expressionists. His work is busy and chaotic. More about him a little bit later. But perhaps these paintings are more reflections of the artist's state of mind and their personality than anything else. If you're going to make artwork about yourself, then you have to understand it's about what distinguishes you from others. We have to perform some sort of introspection so we can express it. And we can do that with people easily, because traditional self-portraiture, we're in the painting. Albrecht Dürer, a German printer, but also painter, he creates himself a very particular way. In fact, he's become almost religious. He looks like Christ, or rather, the Western version of Christ. He makes himself regal. Lovis Corinth, well, the symbolism and metaphor are quite strong in the fact that there's a skeleton. The skull is the symbol of death. Lovis Corinth was very close to death, and actually when he came back again, he managed to teach himself how to paint with his left hand because he couldn't use his right arm anymore. Perhaps this tells us of his experiences. Francis Bacon, of course, and here's a video about Damien Hirst and why he likes him so much. I won't post the whole video now, but I'll link it so you can watch it in your own time. Francis Bacon painted others, but perhaps really he painted the monsters, and maybe they weren't other monsters, maybe the monsters inside him. He suffered from Great Depression. And here's a good example of monsters. Saturn Devouring a Son by Rubens. Rubens paints Saturn, the king, who, in defense and defiance rather, decided to eat his children rather than overthrow them. He's maniacal. He's a maniac. He's very conscious of what he's doing, and you can see in his eyes, and he intends to finish the job. Goya, on the other hand, in his painting, Saturn Devouring a Son, is a very different sort of king. Saturn, again, is very aware of what he's doing, but is horrified, but continues to do it. This is one of Goya's black paintings. Towards the end of his life, again, he suffered Great Depression and locked himself away. He went completely deaf and painted the most depressing paintings. Jenny Saville's self-portraits tell us something about how she perceives how she's seen. She doesn't look like this. And she elaborates on that by painting carcasses from the butcher's shop, pieces of meat. Perhaps the most famous painting of all, most famous portrait, might tell us more about Leonardo than it does in fact about the sitter, the Gioconda, the Mona Lisa. But to how others appropriate, they tell us more about them. Morimura, for example, the Japanese contemporary artist, his version of the Mona Lisa is very different. He uses a combination of living paintings where he sits and is photographed, and digital collage will alter and change. We get to understand perhaps more about Morimura than we do about Leonardo. Even the background changes. Two artists, similar work, different meanings. Perhaps the ultimate self-portrait by Mark Quinn. If you don't know what it is, look closely. It's a cast of his own head, and we can see the line where the casts were put together, and it's frozen. It's his blood. Over a period of a few months, he had 9 pints of blood withdrawn, and then he froze them again. There are many stories about cleaners unplugging the machine in the Saatchi gallery, and in the morning there's a big puddle of blood on the floor. But essentially it is the ultimate self-portrait. We see the man, and it's actually literally made of him. Gerhard Richter, the famous abstract expressionist painter, also painted photorealist with oils. It tells us a lot about him that he can do both of these things, but chooses to do this. From the Archibald Prize a few years ago, Dan Crother's Black Sheep of the Family. Well, I think it tells us a lot already about the artist. And Luke Chu's portraits of him, perhaps, but as a Chinese American growing up in a racist America, how he feels trapped and targeted and hidden behind the mask. And of course Vincent van Gogh, another tortured artist, here not long after slicing a part of his ear. We see it in his eyes. But of course this could be considered a portrait as well, a self-portrait. Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh was the view from his hospital window, or the asylum as it was called. This was what he saw every night. Places can be portraits. Geoffrey Smart's last painting before he died, The Labyrinth, an endless maze with this solitary classic Smart figure, has to be him. It may be the daytime, the blue sky is still quite dark on the horizon. George Shaw's painting. Well, it mean nothing to you, but where I grew up, this is the moment I used to play football. And of course, he's the same era as me. What we have is an artist who uses Humbrol air-fixed paints to paint. And these scenes tell us about his childhood. This place is a photograph by Richard Long. It's called Line Made in the Ground by Walking. In theory, it's a self-portrait. Long leaves his mark and records it. He made it. It must be about him. A close-up of Barnett Newman's paintings reveal the mark-making procedures that go in. This is Barnett Newman's. It might not tell us much about him, but it is of him. Objects can be self-portraits. Michael Landy recreated the house he was raised in. It's just a shell of a house, it's not real. It would look real from the outside. By placing it in the gallery, he determines its importance. So therefore, it's a story, a narrative about his life and his father's. I wonder if your mind is like this at the moment. Noble and Webster, 6 months of trash, 2 white gulls. Well, we can see them, in shadow. The couple there, reclining back, smoking a cigarette and drinking a glass of wine, and their collected rubbish tells us about their life. The work of Richard Serra, a sculptor who casts giant iron freestanding sculptures. We look at the work of Richard Serra, and it's interactive. You get to walk around it. He was inspired, and he recalls a story of being a young boy and his father taking him to the shipyard. And he remembers the giant ships effortlessly sliding down from the dock into the water. This sculpture on the left can only stand up because it's wedged into the corner. Back to Vincent van Gogh. Is this a self-portrait? His shoes? The Treachery of Images by René Magritte. This is not a pipe. It's a picture of a pipe. He's playing with us. And he continues it, takes it to its logical conclusion. It's still not a pipe anymore. Pablo Picasso, of course, well, all his work was probably about him, the bull, or the minotaur. He was often referred to as the bull. Joseph Cornell's boxes, perhaps compartments of his mind. Piero Manzoni, and if you can read Spanish, my apologies, Merda d'Artista. Manzoni suggested, as a reaction to contemporary art, you could put excrement in a can. People would buy it. So he did. 30 grams. Ironically, if one were to open the can, it would lose its value. Well, 2 years ago, somebody did. It was full of plaster of Paris. It lost its value. The artwork, he said, was worth nothing, but people were prepared to pay it. It perhaps gives us his views on contemporary art. But even more contentious and more upsetting is this work by Michael Landy called Breakdown. Over a period of a few days, in an old abandoned warehouse shop, in a conveyor belt, he collected more than 7,000 of all his belongings, catalogued them, and systematically destroyed them, sending them off to landfill. Nothing was sold, nothing was gained, and by the time he finished, he had literally nothing left. His car keys, his house keys, his wallet, his passports, photographs. He said the most uncomfortable thing was destroying his father's sheepskin jacket. Tracey Emin's Everyone I've Ever Slept With from 1963 to 1995 initially makes us balk at the thought of a tent with its sexual overtones. But it's not. She wants the audience to react that way. It literally is embroidered with the names of everyone she ever literally slept with. When she slept in bed with her grandma as a child, her partners, and of course her lovers, and her friends. It is not sexually implied, it is quite simply people she slept with. But Tracey Emin's bed, which caused ructions when it was first exhibited, is a snapshot of what was going on at her time, when she suffered a breakdown, surrounded by the detritus of not leaving her house for weeks on end. The Hot 100. This artist tells us who his favourites are. Perhaps knowing the favourites gives us an idea about him more than them. A portrait can be very traditional. Rembrandt, of course, even with his graffito hair scratched through and the dark pallor over his face and shadow, tells about himself as a young man, but as does Jackson Pollock. His challenge with alcoholism led him to create these large cathartic paintings in a way to exorcise the demons. This is the inside of Pollock's mind. What do you do now? Well, it's about collecting imagery that is metaphorical and symbolic of you. Here's one from Gus from last year. And then creating an artwork which tells us something about you. Your feelings, your passions, your loves, your hates, your dislikes. But you're not in it. But you are. But you're not.